Welcome to this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have with us Brad Flowers, founder of Bullhorn, a branding agency leading professional service transformations. He's also an author of the naming book, Five Steps to Creating Better Brand. So we'll learn from him the most common branding mistakes, why differentiation is an epidemic in the service sector, how issues like hiring or pricing are often misdiagnosed, branding problems, and what every strong brand shares. Welcome to the show, Brad.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to talk.
You're welcome. Welcome to the show. Welcome to India in this online form, Brad. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people, a lot of companies across the world will benefit from what we are going to talk right now. We'll talk about branding for service companies. We'll talk
Wonderful.
about all this. But before that, let's learn a bit about your journey, your background, so that the audience knows who they are listening to.
Sure. So I became a founder of a branding agency in an uncommon way. I didn't go to school for it. I didn't start off at a bigger agency. What I did do is I went to the university and I got a degree in literature. So I was one of those kids who liked reading novels. And I thought, what can you do if you like to do that? And the only thing I could think of was that you can teach other people about novels. And so I thought I would go on to teach at the university. And while I was applying to PhD programs, I worked at a bicycle shop. And interestingly enough, working at a bicycle shop is actually quite a good education to prepare you for life in the business world. You need to learn what sort of bikes you need to order that people will be interested in. You need to learn how to service those bikes for the lifetime to create long-term customers. You need to understand relationships, marketing, all the basics of business. And so while I was there, one thing I realized was that I didn't like to teach. So the problem was I didn't really have a backup plan. And this is kind of fast forward to 2008. In the United States in 2008, there was kind of an economic recession. And as I left the bicycle shop in August, thinking I needed to kind of fix up my house. So I bought an old house. I was fixing up the house. And while I was doing that, I thought I'll probably get a job at an advertising agency and do copywriting. The problem was because the economy was getting worse and worse and worse, no one was hiring. And so during that time, I was talking with a friend and he had been doing marketing for music festivals and putting on music festivals. And I had been doing a little work on the side with bicycle events. And we thought we would do some event marketing. And so that's how Bullhorn started. Basically, it was a terrible economy and no one was hiring. And so we became reluctant entrepreneurs.
Absolutely, absolutely. Entrepreneur nonetheless, and doing a lot of great work. I see you are also an author. I want
Yes.
to understand when you talk of branding for services, service companies. So isn't their servicing itself is the brand? Why is it that they need to create brand as separate? I want to understand it from that point in time. There are hundreds of service companies. Help us understand from that. What is it that you want to tell us a bit about service companies? People understand service companies, but for a layperson, let's understand from a basic point of view.
Yeah. So when I say service companies, I'm really referring to professional services. And so that's, you can think of legal, accounting, consulting services, marketing, those sorts of professional. It's often B2B, but not exclusively. A lot of times you'll see like financial advisors are in that group and they tend to be B2C. So the way I see it, from a branding perspective, in my mind, the companies get split into kind of two groups. There are the companies that are providing a product, and that product kind of takes on a life of its own. And the product needs consumer testing and it needs packaging and all of those sorts of things. And as a branding agency, those are just things that we don't do very much. And we're not great at that kind of thing. On the service side, however, from my perspective, if you're running a professional service company, what you're really selling is the culture of your firm, because the culture is just a fancy way of talking about all of the brain power of the people that work in your firm, whether they're accountants or IT professionals or engineers or architects. Those are all people who have advanced training, who are experts in their field. And so what we do is our process helps understand what makes your culture unique, and really, which is again a way of saying we really get to understand your expertise, and we take that expertise and use the expertise as a differentiator in your brand. And so I think, to get to your original question, why do professional service companies even need a brand? It really gets to that point you brought it up at the beginning about differentiation, because at some point you're going to need to hire a professional service company for your company. Maybe you need a legal advice, or maybe you need an accountant. And how do you choose? If they all look the same, how do you pick one over the other? And so what we think is, if the company has a strong brand, they can stand out, they're differentiated, and you get a sense of what it would be like to work with them before you work with them, which is a huge advantage for them and gives them a big advantage in their marketplace.
Absolutely, absolutely, Brad. So for these companies, these service companies, they generally get their business, because these are all accounting and some of these things. They are businesses which are a lot of times, at least from in India, if I'm talking about traditionally, it's more
Okay.
of reference. People know each other, they ask each other, because these are, you let them into your confidential papers and everything.
Yes.
A lot of small businesses are there,
Yep.
which are growing fast, or which have their own different ways of looking at it. Even
Absolutely.
internationally, also, I don't know, you'll be able to tell at that time, it is more about the individual uh, approach, individual understanding.
Yes.
When you move towards branding,
Hmm.
how does it create value rather than diluting any of that, sort of a thing, that you will be able to give that personalized attention to the firms that might maybe talking to you. People normally think that these are one person, two-person, or a bit of more persons. When it becomes too big, then it's a different company altogether. Help us from that perspective. Generally, less than around three people or less.
Yeah. It's a great point, and it's definitely true in the United States too. The most most professional service companies get most of their business from word of mouth. You need to hire a marketing firm. You ask me because I'm in the marketing space, and I connect you to a friend somewhere. And because I have some expertise, that gives them um, some kind of it separates them from everyone else in your head, because you know someone who trusts them. It gets down to trust, really, doesn't it? A lot, because these are instances where whether it's financial services with your money, accounting, with legal, architecture, these are all situations where the person kind of has to get it right. So trust is really important. And so my perspective is, if these companies are successful, they'll do really well as a one person firm, and then they'll grow to a two person, then a three-person firm, and then they'll hire a few junior associates underneath them. And at some point, they'll hit a revenue ceiling, because you can only grow to a certain point with word of mouth marketing. And that's the point. If you're a professional services firm, and if you're hitting a revenue ceiling and you're having a hard time breaking through to the next level, that's when you need to really think about your brand, because um, word of mouth works for your friends, but it doesn't really work when you start to think about, how do I stand apart from all of the other firms in India, or all of the other firms in the United States, and you're thinking about running some digital ads, or you think you're going to buy a billboard, or whatever marketing you're thinking about, you can't buy yourself out. You can't buy enough marketing to break through that revenue ceiling, because you haven't taken the time to create the differentiation that we talked about. Until you really understand who you are and what you do and what makes you unique, all of that marketing money will just be, flushed down the toilet. So I think it's really important to go back to the beginning, to start at the basics, understand who you are, articulate who you are, what you do, and importantly, understand who your ideal customer is. Because as you grow, at the beginning, businesses can serve just about anyone who walks in, they'll take. But as you grow, you kind of need to get a little more specific and a little more specialized. So eventually, you're not just a lawyer for kind of anyone who needs it. Maybe you provide just contract law for large companies. And so then your set of businesses that you're trying to attract is totally different, and you need to speak to them in a different sort of way. They're different kind of decision makers. They have a different perspective, and the stakes may be different.
Absolutely, Brad. Let's look at the naming part. You talk about the mistakes, that
Mhm.
such service businesses, companies can make. And you are also the author of the naming book, Five Steps to Creating Better Brand Names. From
Yep.
that perspective, let's understand it. A lot of these firms, when they begin, it is either one person in their own name or two persons name joined together. They create some entity, especially in legal firms, in professional firms, accounting and all.
Yes.
In many places, and then but by that time, that when they establish it all, it starts, it is known by that name. Their email addresses also sometimes are like that.
Yes.
Even other names, people know them by that.
Yes.
When you meet them or talk to them, how do you propose a change of name in such a situation when they already have a legacy which is giving them good returns? Help us understand from, so that others who are listening, firms who are listening, they may be having the thing, but they want to grow. How do they understand this nuance of branding that you are talking about from
Yeah.
a global perspective?
Yeah. That's another great question, because growth is the real key thing. My advice is, if you have a brand name that's working and isn't creating problems or barriers for you, don't change it. That part's pretty easy. It's the easiest thing is to not do anything. And if it's working, work it, keep going. However, a lot of firms, especially right now, what we're finding is there were these firms that were started 30, 40 years ago. They were named after the founders, or maybe the founding partners, 2 or 3 people. And that's also true in the United States. Actually, in most of the United States, until about 5 years ago, there was a law where if you're a law firm, you have to be named after the partners. And that's just recently changed. So the issue becomes, when the founders retire, what happens? The next generation of leaders who are going to take this and grow it to the next level, do they have the same association with the name? Do the people who are below them have the same association? And so what we're finding sometimes is they feel like these legacy names that have been successful, they've gotten them this far, they don't really feel like the name will get them to the next level. And so if that's the situation, that's an instance where it might be a good idea to think of a name change. So that's one situation, is if it's limiting, if you're having a hard time attracting younger partners into the firm, or if you're having a hard time attracting talent in general, you might think about changing it to something other than named after yourself. The other situation is, oftentimes a firm will start and they'll work locally. And then if they're successful, they'll work regionally. And then if they're really successful, they'll work nationally or internationally. So another thing that happens is, as you grow, there are certain names are just more common than other names. And even if you name it after yourself, that's not necessarily enough to create differentiation. As you grow, you can say, oh, there's someone else with the same name and they're also running a law firm. And this firm wanted to hire me, but instead they hired this other person on accident because they got our names confused. And so if you have some name confusion in that way, and we see that often also, that's another reason why I would suggest thinking about a name change.
Absolutely. So when you talk about this epidemic of differentiation in service-based companies, how do you differentiate, or is it name change itself is a could be the biggest differentiator?
Yeah, I think it's several things. It starts with the name. I think it gets back to the culture, because within each company, because we're all comprised of individuals, the unique mix of each company is just going to be different. And if that uniqueness doesn't make its way through into the brand, and by into the brand, I mean into the visuals, the photography, the illustrations, the rest of the brand language. Does your language sound differentiated? Does it sound unique to you? Your firm might be really sophisticated and exclusive and very high end. And that might sound different. Another firm who might be equally large might be inclusive and engaging, and maybe they might even be more fun. And so they could still be really good at what they do, but how that comes through in their language and in the visuals is going to look totally different. And so when we talk about differentiation, it's all of those brand touch points that mainly makes its way out in communications materials, whether it's internal communications or external communications like website, sales brochures. Maybe you go to trade shows and you have a trade show booth. You can walk around the trade show. Does your booth look and sound kind of like everybody else? You probably need to make a change.
Absolutely, absolutely. Brings me to your company's name, Bullhorn. It reminds me of catching the bull by the horns. How does it work for your company, or does it mean exactly that?
Yeah, it means that, and I don't know if it's the same in India. In the United States, it's also a secondary term for a megaphone.
Got it.
And so
Exactly.
it has two meanings, which is sort of like, going out there, taking life, taking the bull by the horns, and then also the idea of amplifying your voice. And so that's what we were thinking of originally. Although the funny thing is that's been 15 years ago I created that name, and that was the very first brand name I ever made. So I don't know that I would do it the same today, but it has been a serviceable name, and it's worked well for us so far.
Absolutely, I like it too. That's why I mentioned it, and that megaphone thing, it really fits in. You amplify things for others. I want to that is where I want to understand from that point of when do you come into the picture? When do these service companies get you into the picture? Is the trend growing in today's time? Help us understand things from the ground.
Yeah, the trend is growing, and people bring us into the picture. We don't really work for very many startups, because it tends to be a big investment. Really, it's a company that's been successful and is ready to take the next step, and is for some reason finding that there are barriers. And it could be a revenue ceiling, it could be a talent attraction problem, it could be an employee morale problem, it could be a marketplace confusion. Sometimes your original name refers to your original service offering, and then over time your service offering changes. This is especially true in technology, because technology changes so fast. Your original name might be around networking, and then today really what you do is AI integrations, and so the original name doesn't even really make sense anymore. And so those are situations where you've been successful, and you really want to prime you want to prime for the next generation of growth. And so I think it's the time horizon is really important to think about, because we're not talking about an investment that's necessarily going to have a 6-month payoff. This is something that's going to be a 10-year, 15-year, 20-year sort of investment. It's, it's sort of like real estate or something. Oftentimes you need to be thinking in the long term, because the nice thing in service companies is investing in a brand signals to your customers and your clients and to your coworkers that you're thinking long term and that you're going to be around for the long term. And that's just a way that you can build trust with with the people that are essential to your business.
Absolutely, Brad. Which is the segment or sector within the service companies, be it legal, marketing, accounting, that is much more aware about that such a change is needed to grow?
That's a good question. I would say, from my perspective, the companies who we're hearing from most often right now are probably in financial services, because it's so competitive and it's changing so fast with technology. And the other one that we're talking to a lot right now is real estate development. And real estate development, they have some complicated brand problems, because oftentimes the development itself will have a brand, and a building might have a name and it might have a visual identity. And so you need to leverage that. But if that becomes your brand identity, then you're not really positioned to do the next project. And so it's a question of how do you take advantage of these sub brands, which are all the projects that you work on, and leverage those to catapult yourself up to taking on bigger and bigger projects and preparing to to make a bigger impact.
Absolutely. What are some of the challenges, big challenges that you face when trying to help these companies? What are the challenges? Because it's not an easy job to explain them things, explain them the benefit, and the benefit which is going to happen in the long term, not immediately.
Yeah. I would say the biggest challenge is bringing along the rest of the company, because when you work at a professional service firm, oftentimes a lot of your identity as an individual is tied up in your role as a architect or whatever you do for that particular firm. And so any change can be really stressful. And so that's the thing that I think is the hardest, is bringing everyone along with you, because oftentimes the people leading these firms are the ones who are the most comfortable with change. They're ready to ditch it all, change, do the new thing, and move on. But the people who are nervous are the people who maybe don't have as much power or control in the firm. And that's the people who you really rely on, all of your coworkers. And so our process is really engineered to listen to them, to help make sure that their voice is heard, and that when they start to see the brand elements come out, they can sort of see their fingerprints on the process, because we've taken the time to listen.
Absolutely. My last question to you is, what would you like to tell your potential clients about the importance of what you are doing?
Well, I think, at the risk of repeating, the importance is, or the challenge for you as a leader is, you're faced with so many short-term decisions. How do we meet our goals this quarter? How do we meet our sales goal this month? Are we profitable this year? And so it's easy to think short-term. And what I would say, the challenge I would set out to people in the professional services firm is, all of your industries are being massively disrupted right now. And in the next 5 years, what you do will be fundamentally different. And are you prepared for that disruption? And is your brand resilient, or is it fragile? And if you feel like, ooh, we actually might be in sort of a fragile position, then it's time to think about and make a long-term investment to position yourself as a strategic partner, and not as someone who just executes details, because eventually all of those details will be executed by a machine somewhere.
Absolutely. So for those people who would want to connect with you, your potential clients, what is the best way for them to do so?
The best way is to look through our website, which is bullhorncreative.com. Also, I'm on LinkedIn and pretty active, and also our company is Bullhorn Creative on LinkedIn. Those are probably the best two places.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.